So I have just about 2 days before we have a session for my live group. They haven't gotten very far. I believe they're only level 4 right now. And they've been in the same town, small hamlet, for the entire campaign so far. I think we've only done about 4, maybe 5 sessions. And they've done a lot of backtracking to previous areas and have been waylaid a little bit by character deaths in the party as well. We have some new players. This is their first campaign ever, and they've just been suffering from a little bit of death from a combination of bad luck and bad choices because they're brand new. They're going to make bad choices. So what we need to do is that I need to figure out what the new checklist items are going to be. So right now my top on the checklist is Flesh Out Frag, which is ideally the next town that they'll go to. Obviously it's up to them, but all of the NPC pointers are pointing towards Frag whenever they decide that they're done in the current hamlet that they're in. But because we've just recently suffered a character death, I need to add to this checklist that I need to add our good friend Rana, who will be a new character for this. We need to figure out how they're going to meet him. So, finding Rana. I know a lot of people don't put a lot of emphasis on finding new characters for the party under character death or a new player comes in because the whole point is getting the party together so that they can then adventure. But I like to do a little bit, like I don't make it a huge deal where it takes 3 sessions for them to figure out this character or anything, but I like to make it have a little bit of sense and make that introduction of that character a little bit more impressive than your brother just happened to come by and he's got the same character sheet and whatnot. So for Rana, I have not gone through any of the character information as of yet, so I figure we do that together. So one of the first things is, a lot of players, they'll make their names, for me, what I see that is incomprehensible on how to read that, which isn't a huge issue if you have some sort of nickname, which he has. In my world, wizards, it's commonplace for them to have some sort of nickname to hide their name because names are important and can gain power in a lot of the magic circles to include demonic essence. So I'm going to attempt to, I think it's Lohengrin Rana Lomasura? Not sure. I am garbage at reading all of this, but we're going to call it Rana for this purposes. So I do know that this is going to be a high elf war mage wizard, which in my world, high elves are pretty rare. At least for right now, the world as a whole is still being fleshed out, but there's really only 2 areas where high elves come from. So him being a high elf is very interesting when it comes to the world, and should be, hopefully, I've sold it to the other players that seeing a high elf that is odd. I run a primarily human-centric campaign. I won't go too deep into why that is here, but the primary race of the party are humans and half-elves and halflings. Alright, slender with long hair, very angular face, pointed, striking almost almond-shaped eyes. Skin is verges of blue. Okay. He wears a dark gray robe, silver lining, 2 ribbons, the inscription flow down his shoulder, breasted down at his rank. Occasionally wears black collar, double blue ribbons on the chest. Okay, so a lot of filigree, seems to be more well-to-do in appearance, which is important for dealing with NPCs and maybe even the players if they want to bite onto it. Alright, hidden pockets, very nice. Alignment, lawful, yeah. He has a strong belief in government and organization. Cool. Alright. One honor and common good. Okay. So he looks to be fairly leaning good. Maybe slightly on the neutral side. All right, so my player Taylor, he's really good about doing notes. You might have seen the one annotation next to the name, which this explains at the bottom page. Is a Dutch name for the son of Percival in the King Arthur mythology. Rana means wanderer, but also is another name for the moon. Lumeseru means night wind. Cool. So a lot of meaning behind the name, and this is always nice. It's not terribly important that you get all this information, but especially for a player, if you're putting a lot of thought into these portions and it all feeds together and you actually use this knowledge instead of just coming up with it and throwing it aside, it can be super useful. Alright. Cool. To his people and to his order, he has bonds. Okay. He's, more than anything, Rana wants to discover some movement troops and win. Okay. So we see a failing of honor in his name. Alright. Worships one of the old gods. I may need to talk to him about that. In Loris, my world, there are the primordial gods, which have fallen mostly out of favor, and then replaced by the new gods. It's not out of character for an especially an elf to follow the primordial gods, but it's not common. And I think a lot of his backstory does fit with it. This is the part that worries me. Through the army, many of his followers are praised. Fellow soldiers praised. It would not be terribly widespread, but I don't know. Maybe there's a sect. And that's kind of one of all the things that I always try to do with my players, is that if they have an idea of something, if they have a strong reason for why they have that idea, then I'm more than happy to find a way for it to work. But if it's one of those just thrown off to the side, because obviously none of my players have even a small percentage of the knowledge of the world that I created because I created it. So he might not actually know that Sanguine is super out of favor. So I'll just have to talk to him about that. So I will probably add that to my notes. Let's add that. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, ask Taylor about Sanguine Connection Run. We'll get more information on that, and that'll probably be messed around with in the future. So we go back to this. Family history. Commander of an elven military, long line soldier. Rana's mother is the daughter of a member of the High Elven Council. Okay, cool. That's strong, noble background. I know that he has the soldier mechanical background, but it also gives him nobility, just with obviously no mechanical benefits to his nobility. And we go down to childhood. Elven Kingdom. Trained to become a knight and a military leader. Intellectual prowess. He was expanded to someday lead the division of war. To intensely train, they pushed the military. Rana. So we'll see what happens with his brother. He might be throwing me a bone here to have an NPC. With his father busy responding to constant attacks, his brother spent very little time with him growing up. Likewise, his mother made frequent travels to inland Orisum for the sake of diplomacy. Their time was mostly spent with tutors and teachers. Among his teachers, Rana became close to a history teacher and one of the Arcana tutors, an old gnome named Fiddlewink. Yeah, this player is always very good about his gnomish names. Very cool. So I have a Fiddlewink, and I have his brother, which I don't think he named his brother in this portion of it. So we're going to go over here. We're going to add to the notes, Fiddlewink. Gnomish, was he a... Whoop, closed it out. Alright, let's get that back. Fiddlewink. Fiddlewink was the Arcana tutor. Okay. All right. Rana's brother. Let's see if we can get any names out of that when we get to that portion. All right. Studies. All right, so we have some annotations here. Going through this just real quick because this stuff is most likely not going to be terribly important, but you always want to, as a DM, at least comb through once in their entire backstory. Order of the Silver Thistle. That might be important. All right, I see this. Okay, here we go. Aras Limonid. Right, so there is an Aras. We'll actually just do this. Oh no, I got that wrong. So he's just close. Divination specialist. Okay. Divination specialist. Can't spell. And he is also, or they, I'm not actually sure the gender of this one, divination specialist and military analyst. Fitting for divination wizard. Okay, so they were the Order of the Silver. All right, so we'll add that as well. Mishap. Through divination, Aras gain knowledge of an orc horde encroaching on a gnome village. Home of Fiddlewink. Okay. Rana brought the intel to his commander, but was told that this is not a concern of Palantiri. So they led the 8 members of the Order of the Silver Thistle to the smaller encampment. 2 of the members refused to join them and preferred to obey Order of the Silver Thistle, traveled along a secret route to ambush a small orc encampment. On their way through, they were attacked by a group of almost twice their size. Zeros gained knowledge of Orger and Wargs. After 3 of the elves, including Aras, had died, the Silver Thistle managed to escape. As they were escaping, Rana managed to shoot out Burning Hands and scar the left side of the orc commander Kurug's face. Okay. So this is the only bad side about commander. This is the only bad side about, so the way that the map is for my world. Let's see. This is not the world, this is one of the towns. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Alright. So, if we open up the world map and we look at it, we're seeing that, so all of the stuff he's writing about is in Palantiri, which is up here. The campaign exists all the way over here in Dolan, and we'll go to Freg. This is like 8 months of travel to get here. So a lot of the stuff that he's writing and introducing these NPCs will likely not come up, if ever, not for a long time, just because of the distances. And that might be something that I have to bring up with him, is like, if he's okay with that, then I have no problem with it. But I don't want him to write all this thinking that it's going to come up soon. So, upon return, Rana was met by his commander. Commander admonished him for his actions and took him to the High Council. Rana tried to warn the High Council that something fishy was afoot in the orcs' behavior, but they didn't listen. The High Council decided this was a fool's errand and punishment. It was sent a 50-year scouting mission to map out all the goblin hordes across the human empire. So, I guess it's easy to see that this would just kind of be a fool's errand to get rid of somebody. It is inherently odd that they would send somebody of noble repute to do something as this punishment, but the fact that it kind of sounds weak makes it for a stronger narrative that they might have done it on purpose to get rid of him for questioning what was going on. So I do kind of like that. But again, the distance is so large. Maybe it'll fit into a much wider arc. I'll have to go back through. I periodically go back through character backgrounds that were written, especially players like Taylor, who I can see will constantly update his sheets. So every month or so, I go back through to make sure anything that's been updated I actually get to see, and even if there is nothing new updated, it refreshes me because I'm gonna inevitably forget. I run many campaigns, so. When the story starts, he's been away for 8 months. Recent shame from his failures, new explorer in the human empire. Mourning was lost his friend. Though he spent in the wilderness, he learned quickly that humans do not react kindly to his appearance. I am seeing this military as a combination of modern American military practices and the dragoons of the Imperial Army during the Holy Roman Empire. It is partially based on the dragoons for their use of early artillery and their organization rather than the use of mounts. Okay, so that'll go into maybe his military strategy in game and also the strategy of the military if they ever deal with them directly in that way, either allied or against. During his travels for 2 months, he has mapped 2 goblin hideouts. This has involved lengthy reconnaissance on the bases and picking off scouting squads and interrogating them for information. During this process, he learned the approximate location of 2 goblin bases to the east. So this is one thing that worries me, that he is inherently putting goblins in a position of more so than I would in the world of putting them to where they have ideas in their mind. Like, there are other goblins and we're working with them. Usually how I work goblins is that they are kind of cutting out their life as much as they can, and at a certain point, most likely somebody will come in and subjugate them. That's goblins. They do not live a life of autonomy for very long. And while they're alone and dealing with themselves, it's a very difficult life for them, trying to just do what they can to survive. This lends to the idea that they have communication or that they have ideas of where one another are, which doesn't inherently not work. We can make this idea work, but it seeks to have some overarching group that is bringing these goblin tribes together, and I haven't thought about that yet. So this may need some tweaking. So let's see, goblin nature and communication. I don't hate the idea. I just think that, and again, this could all probably be mostly ignored because it's just his character's background. But when he starts saying this to the players at the table, and then, you know, as the DM, I don't say anything about it, it becomes canon. Now, it could be bad information. So, you know, there's always a way to kind of push it under the rug. But I really do need to talk to him about all of this and how much he has invested into it, and if there are ideas that we could change. My first reaction is that to just change everything that says goblin to hobgoblin, because that would be way more appropriate for everything that he's talking about. They're militaristic, that they would actually be a problem, and that would almost fix everything here, and might even feed into the campaign later if we decide, or rather if I decide to have one of the major villain races be hobgoblin. Right now that's not in the cards, but if there's a character attached to it, that would be an interesting development. During his travels, he encountered many beasts and few allies. Most of the beasts he was able to avoid without encounter. He does not enjoy killing creatures. Okay. Among his allies he met, most notable was a ranger named Orvin. Orvin was trying to stop a new criminal activity among nearby goblins. Like Rano, he was trying to escape his past. Okay, so right now we don't have any info on Orvin, but he seems like an interesting NPC. So we're actually going to put that to the top of the list of, because by nature, because he's traveling, Orvin is closer to what the campaign is doing right now. So he is more important to talk about. Personality and behavior. Generally, okay. Borderline intimidating. Okay, meeting new people. Cool. Okay. He loves his culture, elven people. I like that. Destruction of Palantiri. Okay, it's interesting. Which this might play a part in the campaign. It always, it always super dependent on player choice. But everything that I have written right now, a lot of the foes that they're going to be facing cannot be fought in a direct confrontation. They're just too powerful. So this might actually play into the character and have a good arc of growth. Rana is always up for a new challenge. Small glint of fey curiosity inside him. He wants to rush and investigate. Okay. Things like this in my world, the reason why elves aren't all powerful is because as they get older, that kind of charge of adolescence leaves them, and they no longer deal with problems directly. Their reaction to most problems is to let it die out, because they can outlive everything. Why invest time and resources in fighting any sort of enemy or foe when you can outlive them? And their general, I don't want to say laziness, but their just lack of willingness to act leads them to just kind of sit idly in what kingdoms they have left. But as a young elf, that's why young elves sometimes go adventuring, is because they still have that fey curiosity in them. They're young. When we talk about young, we're talking like within the first 200 years of an elf's life. So, yeah, that totally fits within the world, and I do like that he's made his character that way. Drawn to nature, that's not uncommon among elves. They do love that in this world. Okay. So, yeah, he's kind of in that in-between area where obviously he understands the need for civilization, but human civilization is much more damning than elven tend to be, which is accurate. And again, this just goes to show what, as a DM, either my failings or unwillingness to just dump all this exposition on players. That high elves, while yes, they have an affinity for nature, they're not opposed to building large, sprawling cities. Now, yes, it has a lot of an ecosystem in it, all manner of plants and whatnot, but it's not. We're not talking like Wood Elves or like Tolkien, where it's like built into the side of the mountain and all that stuff. And no, you see a high elven city. It's a city. There is no question about it. So it might be just an off comment that I have to talk to him about, not something to write down, but like, hey, it may not be the same thing. Just figure out where his head's at with that. Yeah, magic is more common in elven cities than it is just about anywhere else. It is used as a tool. Okay. It's interesting that he would not use that spell, because it's boastful. He might be different than most of his kind, because high elves tend to be proud and boastful. Alright. Okay. So he's given a little bit of a magical reasoning that his sect uses these crystals, maybe even war crystals, and that maybe not necessarily gives him power. I know that's where it says power comes from, but it might be able to harness it. Prefers evocation magic and abjuration magic. Makes total sense. Okay, and then this is going to be the rest of his notes. So with this character, I think the only thing that we have to go off of for writing him in is really Orvin right now. And I swear he didn't say anything about Orvin other than a ranger, right? Most of the time when people mention like an NPC or any character and they don't mention a race, they mean human, because it's kind of like the default when you don't mention it if it doesn't stick out in your head. Let's see, did it talk about? Yeah, okay, here we go. Orvin. It was a ranger named Orvin. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it doesn't say. So I'm going to guess because he's obviously adventuring right now in human civilization that it's going to be a human ranger. So we'll deal with Orvin. All right, so that's about all we have to go on to get Rana into this. And I do, now that I've kind of thought about it just a little bit more, I do want to see if he'll bump it up to hobgoblins, because I really haven't done a lot of work on hobgoblins in the world just yet, and so having a reason to do that and a character that's tied to it and a player who might do some writing for that as well would be super useful. So they are going to be going to Freg, which, let's look at the map. All right. And so if he's heading to the east right now, the answer might actually be to let him join in once they get to Freg. It wouldn't be a terrible idea for him, or maybe even Orvin, both, to need supplies in Freg. If he's still with Orvin, I don't necessarily want an NPC to be introduced to the party at the same time and then stick with the party. There would need to be a reason for Orvin to depart. It may be that, and I can talk to Taylor about it, that Orvin just said, hey, I'm heading to Freg, but from here I need to go do something else, or I'm, kicking up my boots for a little bit in Freg. Freg is a larger town, not quite a city, but it is larger, so if he had business there, it would make sense for him to need to just spend some time. Or he might be going further down the river, past where he may want to, where Rana may want to go, which is funny because that's where the party is. So maybe it's the other way around. Orvin is not willing to go further down the river, but Rana has information about that. So, let's throw down a couple ideas so that I can pitch this to my player. All right, got that. That's important to talk about. NPC's distance to campaign setting. Not so terribly important to talk about, so I might put that as the third item, which, let's do this. We're going to say meetup. Okay. So I always have this inclination that, and I constantly have to fight with myself on it because I don't want everything to be this tragic event, but I really feel like that kind of makes it easier to explain why a character would connect and stick with a party is if something tragic happens to them and that party is there to aid them. That at that point, it allows them to stick to it. It's like Chewie and Han in Star Wars. You know, Chewie's with Han because of the life debt that he owes him. And obviously there's more examples in literature, but that's the first thing that comes to my head. And maybe not so extreme. Maybe not Rana is like creating some life debt. But I mean, there's precedence for if something bad happens to you and people are there for you, you immediately have this connection to them because you were there. So I want to see. So I'll have to talk to him about, do we want something a little less emotional, where it's just, you know, the split with Orvin and he has something occurring, in which case we would need something to find them to get tied to in Freg, or there's a tragic occurrence, which would also most likely be something that happens in Freg, or, you know, downriver, catching them on the way of their travel. The tricky part about that is that I don't know if the players are going to try to travel by river or travel on foot. Because if I try to write all this for one or the other and they do the opposite, then the answer might be to write for both and then just use which one is more appropriate. But then that would also mean that the player has to pivot on this writing style, which is, I don't really want to put a new player into that situation. So I think at least for this, I have my notes that I'm going to talk to him about, and then we'll come back to all this writing in reference to that. But in the meantime, we can go back to the checklist that I have. So we still have that we're dealing with, obviously. But the next one, it's super important that we figure out Freg, because within 1 or 2 sessions, I don't expect it to be any more than 2 sessions by the time they get to Freg, and you will see I have nothing written on Freg. So that's what we're going to have to do next, is write on Freg. We'll stop this for right now, just for anybody who is curious about how I start getting a character written into the campaign and join the group. And then the next one will be how we write about Freg. And basically the idea is how we connect players to the environment and how I run NPCs in the environment itself, and how all that moves. All right. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know down below if this was useful to you, if you want to see any changes. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for watching a lot. See you later.